Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Jason Barger. Jason is a leadership consultant, a renowned public speaker, keynote speaker, the author of 4 books, and the host of the Thermostat Podcast. Jason, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are absolutely thrilled to have you on the show. Of course, your podcast is fantastic. You've had some amazing guests lately. And as a sports fan, I've really appreciated Clark Kellogg and Andrew Whitworth. How are you getting such high quality guests for your show?
They're phenomenal. And I've been fortunate to cross paths with some pretty amazing people and, them to connect with the kind of stuff that I'm doing. And, people like that, they love talking about these concepts around leadership and culture and teams and all that. And so I've been really fortunate to get to spend any time with them, which has been awesome.
Well, I will certainly put a link to the Thermostat Podcast in the show notes, and I encourage everyone to give it a listen or watch on YouTube. And also, Jason, we have a shared history. We went to the same high school. I believe you were a couple years behind me at Upper Arlington High School here in Central Ohio. You were in the same class as my brother, I believe, right?
Oh, Big Dave, buddy. Love that guy. So yeah, good to reconnect with you, man, and good to be with the Sword Out family is awesome.
This is great. Thank you so much, Jason. You have such an interesting story. If you could, before we dive into some of the issues revolving around leadership and culture, could you tell us a little bit about your story? You were at Camp Akita. You ran Camp Akita for several years, which was a camp connected with First Community Church here in Central Ohio. And then you went off on some interesting paths. So share us a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, I was fortunate, coming out of college. I went to Denison University, and coming out of that, I was assumed I was going to be doing something, and I was a basketball player, so I was assuming I was going to do something in sports. And at the time, the great John Ross was leading Camp Akita, and at the time pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I think you ought to come help me do this for a little while." And what started as a 1-year, "Hey, would you come and help be a mentor to high school students and college students and help me run the camp?" Next thing you knew, turned into eventually I was the camp director and leading Camp Akita for a decade. And then also dreaming up all kinds of projects to serve the homeless living outside of the shelter system in Columbus, Ohio, and then taking people to build houses internationally for families living in poverty. So we built about 125 houses in Mexico and the Dominican Republic. And 10 years, when he first said, hey, he wanted me to make more than a 1-year commitment, I looked at him like, "This, you're crazy." And next thing you knew, I was there for 10. And so years I would not trade. They were wonderful.
You left Camp Akita and you did something interesting. You wrote a book called Step Back from the Baggage Claim, and that book was written after you spent a week traveling and living in airports.
Yeah, you're saying that correctly, and with the look in your eyes, like, yeah, this guy's a real strange dude. So, when we came to the end of that great 10 years, where again I was lucky to do it and wouldn't trade those years for anything. But I'm also not wired to just kind of sit where I was. I was already kind of leading and running everywhere, and there was really not a next spot for me. And so I said to, my wife, Amy, at the time, I said, "Hey, I think there's a creative venture that I need to go on." And I started to pitch this concept. And I had no idea that this was going to turn out to be my life. But what it was is I spent 7 days living in 7 different airports. So I went from Columbus to Boston to Miami to Chicago to Minneapolis to Seattle to San Diego. 7 cities in 7 days without leaving the airports the entire time. And attempting to write this book, Step Back from the Baggage Claim, Change the World, Start at the Airport. And very strange, wonderful, weirdo experience of being in those airports literally for 7 days without leaving them. But what the book became is this, using air travel as a metaphor to talk about how we move throughout the world and what difference does it make, how we show up to the delays, the obstacles, the cancellations in our lives.
That is such an interesting experiment. I want to know When you started that, when you started the week of living in the airports, not leaving the airports, what did you expect to see? And what were you surprised to see during that endeavor?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. I was there. So anytime anybody's like, "Wait, but did you leave?" It's like, no. I was either on an airplane or in an airport for 7 straight days, and I was, taking nice wet wipe showers, and I wasn't sleeping much, and I was, all of the things that come with that, and. But what I saw was, the main image of the book is if you've ever been to a really crowded baggage claim where the buzzer thing goes off, which I still have no idea why we haven't come up with something better than that noise, but the goes off, and immediately what happens in all these different cities was human beings bum rushing up to the baggage carousel, forming what I like to call the human wall of entitlement, where nobody can actually see the bags and knocking each other out of the way because my bags are more important than yours and I'm in more hurry than you are. And I saw that. And so I expected to see that, but I did see that at all hours of the day in all these different cities. And so it really, again, as a metaphor, like literally I wanted to change that at the airport, but also as a metaphor for if we're doing that at the airport, there's probably other areas of our lives where we're probably behaving in the same way. So that I wasn't surprised by. That was the, kind of the premise of the book. The things I guess I was surprised by is, and I talk about this in the book, but when I'm a random traveling, I'm going to all these different places, but anytime that I stopped and actually allowed myself to kind of open up and talk with somebody along my path, there always ended up to be an amazing story. There was always somebody else, a traveler right by me that just had an interesting something that just happened in their life. And I guess that didn't surprise me, but I was pleasantly surprised by just the way that played out throughout the entire trip.
That was the first of 4 books. Another one of your books was Breathing Oxygen.
Yeah.
And in that book, you introduce 6 leadership mindsets: clarity, inclusivity, agility, grit, rest, and ownership. For teams that struggle to keep improving over time, which of those mindsets is most consistently lacking?
Well, I just did a speech this morning for an organization, and just this morning we were talking about that we as human beings, we are wired for comfort rather than progress, right? So we as human beings, we know this, that we are wired to, once we know how to do something or once we get comfortable doing something, we're much more likely to just repeat the same pattern that we already know. And so striving to do something different and better, to taking ownership over this new created life or, change that we want, that's why it's so hard. And that's why it's challenging for so many different people. And so, in my work with teams and organizations where we're helping to develop people or we're trying to proactively shape the culture they want, I talk about the 6 A's of leading change. And, different people and different methodologies have different ways that they talk about the change process. But if you study change theory, you'll really see that we all, whether we know it or not, you go through a pattern. It all follows the same pattern. And so the 6 A's real quickly are assess. Like, research would tell us we won't change if we don't step back and assess, like, what went well, what didn't go well, what do we like, what do we want more of, what do we want less of. And then we have to align ourselves. So when we talk about leadership development or culture shaping, aligning ourselves around what are some of those key concepts and what are the foundational kind of values that are going to drive us. And then we have to aspire, which part of your question is a lot of people that don't change is because they don't identify anything aspirationally that they want to be different. And so what is it you aspire to be different? And then you've got to be able to articulate it. If you can't describe it to yourself or to somebody else, then you can't be surprised when it doesn't exist. And then you got to tie it to action, which means it can't be a daydream. It's got to actually be put into motion. And then lastly, you anchor it, which means it becomes a part of your processes, your habit. Habitually, this becomes the way we do things. And so I think what trips people off often is we cling to comfort rather than be willing to dive into that process of leading change.
I want to get back just a minute, and I do have some questions about the 6 A's, but I want to get back just a moment to breathing oxygen and the mindset of rest.
Yeah.
When you talk to leaders, most leaders, to think have to be successful, you never rest. It's the grind culture, the hustle culture, that I'm always on the go.
Yep.
Why is rest such an important mindset for a leader when a lot of times a leader might think, now that I am in this leadership role, I can never rest?
Yeah, that's part of the myth. And that's part of it. You know, we've grown up to think that way. And also, and again, don't hear me as saying that you don't have to work hard. You don't have to roll up your sleeves. You don't have to go through a grind of, but we're starting to become more evolved in the way that we understand what elite performance is. You probably know this, or at least many of your listeners know this as well, that we often in companies and organizations, we reference things like the 10,000 hour rule. Right? And the 10,000 hour rule is where you have to put in deliberate practice of a craft to become an expert at something. And you have to put in research would tell us about 10,000 hours. Well, part of this myth around elite performance is we've taken that in our culture when we run with it, that's all it is. So elite performance is only tied to that deliberate practice, that grind culture, that always I'm going to outwork the competition. And yet the reality is a part of that exact same study, it's actually a study from a bunch of Germans back in the 80s that did that same study where they came up with the 10,000 hour rule, connected to it also was real clarity around 30,000 hours of deliberate rest. And so really when they stepped back and they looked at these people that had become elite performers, it was not only the 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. That's table stakes. That's a non-negotiable. To be good at anything, you got to be willing to put in the work. But really what they found is the people that for the long haul were continually successful and elite performers, they were relentless about the amount of deliberate rest to their minds and their bodies so that they could be at their best when their best is needed. And so I could see you even in the world today, people are like, yeah, but I can't take time. Well, in the United States alone, about 768 million days of vacation go unused each year. Because people buy into this myth that I can't possibly take time off. And yet that's about $66 billion of lost benefits that people have that they don't take. And yet what we find is performance doesn't go up, it goes down. And yet people that come out of and have that connection of deliberate practice and deliberate rest, their performance goes up. So in my opinion, there's an opportunity to reassociate ourselves to how we think about elite performance and how we think about how we lead and the cultures that we create.
Do you find that it's harder for leaders to even wrap their minds around the concept of rest when we are so connected with everyone and everyone has the expectation because of the phone in our pocket that we are accessible 24/7 at any time? How do you make leaders understand or believe that they can actually get that deliberate rest?
Well, what you're describing is reality, and I know
Right.
that. I'm certainly not saying that it's an easy switch, and I'm not saying it's an easy thing. But what I find is that people intuitively know it. They know deep down in themselves that they need to slow down, and that the performance of their, and when I say performance, by the way, I'm not just talking about work. I'm talking about how they show up as a parent, how they show up as a partner, how they show up as a friend. Are they actually engaged in the life that they really want to have? And oh, by the way, are they performing in a way in their career that's meaningful to them? I think most people, at least that I find, they know it deep down, but there are a lot of challenges of how do we in a 24/7 culture be willing to turn the phone off for a little while, to go on do not disturb, the boundaries that we begin to set with our team and the expectations that we begin to set for how we're going to communicate together. And what I find is the ones that begin to at least establish some of those boundaries, one, they end up retaining more great people. and attracting more great people. But also what we find is their performance starts to go up because it's the myth of the faster I run, the further I get is just that. It's a myth.
Moving again to the 6 A's, assess, align, aspire, articulate, act, and anchor. You went through that framework. 2 of those that really stand out to me are align, because getting teams aligned is exceedingly difficult, and aspire, because I think it's hard to make people believe that they can aspire to accomplish things for whatever limitations. People always talk about the limitations in front of them. We don't have the budget. We don't have the time. So how are some tricks that you use, and tricks isn't the right word, tips that you use to build alignment and give people the freedom to be aspirational?
Yeah, no, each of those steps is equally important, but you got to take time to align for sure. When we talk about developing people and leaders, and then or it being intentional about a culture that we're trying to shape across an organization, to think that it just magically comes together overnight is not realistic. That it requires time for us to come together, and even the word leadership, to even align around what is it that we mean and what does authentic and compelling leadership even really look like. It takes time and a willingness to kind of step back and let's say, hold on, let's make sure that we're speaking the same language, that we're talking about the same thing. And so, one of the tips I would share around alignment is we've got to make time to identify what are those key conversations that are the currency for change, those few priorities that we've got to make sure that we are in alignment on. It doesn't mean we all agree on the exact same things, but we've got to have alignment on how are we even talking about these things. And then you're right, in terms of aspiring, again, back to the fact that we know this about human reality is it's easier for people to drift to comfort rather than progress. And part of that is the speed at which we're running in our lives and in our work is that we're so frantic to get through the to-do list and get to the next thing that often it seems hard to then reimagine what would be that next aspirational goal. And so again, we've got to challenge ourselves to say, but yeah, if we truly want to move the needle here, what does that look like? And let's make sure that we're taking the time thoughtfully to identify what that next goal is, what that next direction is, what that next stretch of the strategy is going to be. And then to make sure that we're challenging ourselves that what's it going to require in action behavior to shift in that direction.
Jason, I love your background. I love that you've got Thermostat right above you in big fancy letters. It looks fantastic.
Because it's like cocktails and dreams, from the old.
That was a great reference to the hit film Cocktail, starring Tom Cruise and Elizabeth Shue, which he got an F on in his class and then made it a reality later in the film.
Amazing.
Because obviously your podcast is called the Thermostat Podcast, and one of the things you talk about all the time is thermostat cultures.
Yep.
So can you explain the difference between operating like a thermometer versus a thermostat, and why that distinction matters so much for leaders?
Yeah, this all grew out. The third book that I wrote is called Thermostat Cultures, and it really plays off the central image of the difference between thermometer thinking and thermostat thinking. Thermometer thinking, and by the way, public service announcement, I've got nothing against thermometers. I think they're great. I think they play a great role in society. I'm glad we have them. But really, when we think about what a thermometer does, is all it does is react to the external conditions and tell us what the temperature is. And so oftentimes I say to groups, if we have a giant thermometer in the room and we just kept bringing bodies in the room, it would just react to the temperature. There's more bodies in the room, and it would tell us the temperature goes up. And if everybody left the room, it would react and go down. There are too many individual leaders and entire teams and organizations, and I would just say human beings in general, that it's easy for us to fall into thermometer thinking, can get stuck there where all we are is purely reactionary to the things that are happening around us. And so is it raining today? Well, then what's my mood? Is my, what's happening out there? What's happening around me? What is it the other person saying? What's the situation? And we can get ourselves into purely kind of reactionary thermometer thinking. And when we do that, we tend to fall into a kind of knee-jerk reaction kind of thinking. It's often a lot of kind of blaming other people and pointing the finger at other people, at kind of a disassociation. And so we talk about thermostat thinking and thermostat cultures being the opposite of that, because a thermostat, as we know, sets the temperature, regulates the temperature, controls the temperature, which means that we have to have, with intentionality, well, what is the temperature that we're aiming to set? And so rather than just reacting to all the things that happen around us, is to already be thoughtfully understanding that temperature we're aiming to set. And then as the things happen around us, that we don't have to spend any time and energy thinking about what the response should be, because we're already clear about what that is. And so different than thermometer thinking and thermostat thinking, instead of it being reactionary, it's proactive. And it starts to feel intentional and purposeful. And instead of who's to blame and it being somebody else's fault, it's I take personal ownership because, well, what's the temperature that I'm going to set? And so that happens on an individual level, for me, if I don't have intentionality around, well, what type of father am I hoping to be? Then I can just react to everything that happens around me. But if I have some intentionality, which does not mean that I'm perfect in any stretch of the imagination, but he or she who aims at nothing hits it every time. So what is it I'm aiming for? And then when I have that kind of intentionality, I tend to be more intentional and purposeful as a father, more intentional and purposeful as a husband, as a friend, and certainly with the colleagues and the team members or the organizations that I'm serving. So in culture shaping, part of that process of shifting the thinking from thermometer to thermostat thinking is getting clearer as a team and as an organization, well, what is that culture that we aim to create into the future?
A lot of our listeners are continuous improvement professionals, operational excellence professionals.
Yep.
And operational excellence teams often see early wins on an improvement effort only to watch it fade a few months later. From your perspective, how does a thermometer culture contribute to that fade out, those early wins fading away, the change not lasting? And how does a thermostat culture keep that momentum from fading?
No, that's a great question and a great observation, because we're so quick in any subject or any project or initiative in the world today is to jump to the next shiny object. And so oftentimes, even if we have great intentions and we start out in a change process or an initiative or a project starts going in a great direction like you described, it's oftentimes easy for us then to shift back into thermometer thinking and then just kind of get almost bored and or just start to get distracted. I talk about in a lot of my books that we live in the most busy, cluttered, and distracted time in the history of the world. And so it's easy for us to shift our focus back then and just jump to the next shiny object. So one of the biggest challenges I see is that we have great intentions when we start these things, but we don't often have the staying power to see them through. In thermostat cultures, the ones that actually stick and start shaping a culture that does stay around for years, it's often because we talk about culture shaping as not a drive-through experience. We're going to have to stay committed. And every time we start to find our the natural tendency of humans, our eyes to drift to that shiny object, we've got to come back. I talk a lot about where we look is where we go. Where we look, our bodies will follow. And so when we start to feel that creep coming in of shifting back into that thermometer thinking, we got to bring our eyes and our focused attention back to that change process and say, hold on a second. Let's get ourselves where we look, our bodies will follow. Let's continue to stay with this so that we can see the change through. And what we end up finding is the further that becomes just the way we do it, in breathing oxygen, I talk about, companies and organizations. I mean, I remember, you'll know this reference, but Cameron Mitchell restaurants, it has all these concepts now across the country, all these different restaurants. But one of the things he said to me as we were doing a chat like this one time, and he said to me, "Oh yeah, the culture around our restaurants, it's just the air we breathe." And I stopped him and I said, I understood what he was saying. And I said, hold on, but you're saying it as if it just magically came together. And the reality is, as he and I then talked further about it and dove into the history of that, the shaping of that culture, the air that they breathe now was the efforts of years of small culture being shaped by the way we think, act, and interact. So years of intentionality around that, so that then a decade later, you're able to even make that comment that it's just the air that we breathe. It's not by accident, it's by intentionality over many, many years.
I do know that reference, Jason, and we actually celebrated my graduation from law school at a Cameron Mitchell restaurant. So that was a very nice nice
awesome.
reference for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Not everyone driving change gets to do it from the corner office, right? They might see the need for change, but maybe they're not necessarily at the top of the org chart. So What advice do you have for someone in that position who wants to shift the culture without a formal title or formal authority? What advice would you have for someone like that?
Yeah, no, great question again. So we talk about, kind of capital L leadership and lowercase L leadership, and the fact that some people are leaders in the sense that they've been given a title, which by the way doesn't mean that they always lead, but are in a position of leadership. But we talk about leadership that every single person, no matter where you are in the world, let alone in your organization, has the ability to lead in the sense that somebody's always watching you and taking cues from you on how you show up to do what you do. And you are a leader in sense that you are influential, and you, again, whether you know it or not, you set a temperature for the people around you. And oftentimes in an organization, the culture begins to be, is being shaped by those people on the front lines and those people throughout the organization every single day. And so oftentimes when somebody says to me, "Oh, I'm only," and they typically say it that way, "I'm just a," which is a terrible phrase, but that's what they say, "I'm just a," and they diminish themselves because they're not the fancy title. I often remind them they have a sphere of influence that they might not even know about. And how they show up to do their work and how they approach it does begin to shift things around them. And oftentimes opens doors to future conversations and future opportunities as well. So I would say think about the area that you live in, the old kind of bloom where you are mentality. And if you can control and set the temperature in how you show up, it typically, leads to better things.
Because you are a leadership consultant, in addition to being an author and a keynote speaker, when you as a leadership consultant walk into a new client engagement, what's the first thing you listen or watch for? And how do you tell the real culture apart from what leadership might tell you the culture is? Because a lot of times there's a difference.
No doubt. Yeah, and I'll cue in on a couple of concepts here. And one of the words that you said, the first thing I do is I listen. So it starts with that listening. Anytime somebody reaches out and says, "Hey, we want you to come speak," or "We want you to engage with our organization," or "We want you to potentially be a partner to help develop our people and culture throughout our organization," every single thing starts with listening. And I want to understand, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What's your mission? Why is this important to you? And tell me about how you experience your people and your culture now. And what is it that you aspirationally want to be in the future? So one is an assessment. Let's talk about kind of where do we assess things to be now? And then aspirationally, What is it that you're hoping to create? And then we also, in the beginning stage of that relationship is because I want to make sure that I'm not looking to just partner with just anybody and just to have work. I'm partnering with places that are truly wanting to move the needle. And so I want to know, are we truly committed to this? Is this important and a valuable thing to you all, or are we just, feeling like we got to fill some time here? And if we're just doing that, then I'm probably not the best fit for you. But if we're really trying to move the needle, then let's start to identify what is really happening and what it is that we want it to become. The second piece that you reference is in the fancy term in the culture shaping world would be cultural dissonance. And that happens in many organizations, is that the culture that the leaders say there is, or the culture, the words that they write up on the wall, the core values that they say are important to the company, are not what people experience in real life, and creates, again, the fancy term is cultural dissonance, that people feel that there's a dissonance between this is what we say we are, but that's not really what I experience. And oh, by the way, that happens in many different forms, in many different teams and organizations and relationships. But the best ones begin to identify, where is this dissonance? And then let's begin to bring our people into participation around, well, what is it we want it to become? It's not just about what the CEO wants. Certainly the CEO or the leadership team, they have to be in alignment as to where we're trying to go. But it's not just about a dictatorship of what they want for the organization. In my opinion, the best culture initiatives bring people into participation and dialogue around, what do we want as a company? What do we want as a team? And what role do we all play in creating it? So you have to be able to listen and assess kind of where it is current day, and you have to understand where it is that we're trying to go. But you also have to begin to address some of that dissonance that you might be experiencing.
So as a leadership consultant, you've worked with some very big and famous companies, Nationwide, Wendy's. Can you share an example of an organization, and you don't have to name names, but share an example of an organization that successfully shifted from reactive to a proactive culture, and what made the difference in that change?
Yeah. And I won't, I'm sure I'll be talking nice things. So I guess they probably won't, mind me sharing their name, but at the same time, I'll leave the name out of it just in case that's strange to anybody. But
right.
We just did we just did a video celebrating their culture that gets shared across they're an organization, an engineering firm that has locations all across the country. And we just did a video celebrating 6 years into this culture shaping initiative that we've been on. And they were very, I'll tell you what was successful about it and then what some of the outcomes have been. One, they deserve the credit because their leadership, when they first engaged with me and were considering other people, but engaged with me to listen and try to say, what is it they want to do? They had clarity around, for them, strategically as an organization across the country, they wanted to raise their level of emotional intelligence and a spirit of servant leadership across their organization. And if they did that, they believed that would help make them into a stronger firm and performance would follow. As I listened to that, and I agree, by the way, I was very much aligned in this thinking and shared the path, we started to chart a course with throughout their organization, and how do we put the top 330 leaders throughout the organization over years through experiences to develop their emotional intelligence and their servant leadership. And now we've gone on to have these regional culture summits across the organization. We've done all this stuff over the course of 6 years. And the first 4 years spanned their first strategic plan. And now, because the results have been so great, we're now into the second 4 years. So we're for a total, we're 6 years into an 8-year plan. And in the first 4 years, across their company, turnover was cut in half.
Wow.
From 15% down to 7%. They in the first 4 or 5 years of this initiative, they in the 120-year history of their company, they've never hired more people in the history of their company than in this stretch of time. So they retained their very best people. They dropped their turnover in half. They created a culture where more people wanted to be, and they hired more people in the history of the company. And therefore, they also had the 5 most profitable years in the history of the company over this stretch of time. That's one example, and I could cite some others that have similar kind of responses to this, that when they've stayed committed and strategic and intentional about shaping the leadership development and the culture within their organization, their performance skyrocketed.
I'm glad you mentioned servant leadership, because that's something we've talked about on the show quite a bit. I would love to know what you think servant leadership is. What does that mean to you?
What it means to me is, and I talk about this all the time, is that how we think about what it means to lead matters. And the way we frame that up is, every single one of us, how we enter a room, how we enter a meeting, the way we think about what the word leadership means impacts every one of those conversations and every one of those, those rooms that we enter. And if somebody thinks of themselves that leadership is about being at the top of the pyramid, which means if in their mind they see leadership is about being at the top of the pyramid and it's about power and control and getting people to do what you want them to do, then that's the way you're going to show up. For me, the way I think about it, and I've been very much confirmed in this, when I travel around to all these organizations all around the world, and I've asked people the question, tell me the characteristics of the most influential, compelling, exceptional leader you've ever experienced in your life. And not one time has anyone ever described that top of the pyramid leader. In my opinion, every single time they describe the image I would see in my own head and that I see is flipping that pyramid upside down. And that even if the person they were describing was the CEO or the head of the organizational pyramid, the way they showed up and the way they saw themselves was actually at the bottom of the pyramid. And the way they think about what it means to lead is actually to serve a mission that's greater than themselves, to serve that it's not about getting people to do what you want by power and control and coercion, but it's actually by building relationships and connections and developing and empowering people to bring their gifts to serve a mission greater than selves. And so it's about coaching and developing rather than power and control. And so, I've experienced that in my own life as I've developed my own, what I have seen. I mean, we referenced some of the building of houses and serving homeless and things these experiences that I've been so fortunate early in my life to really frame the way that I think about what it means to lead. And I've been more affirmed as I've been in organizational settings now for 17 years of developing people and culture, the ones that get the greatest response, meaning retain, attract, people want to continue to work with and be around, and their performance follows, all tend to have those characteristics of a servant leader.
One of the things we've talked about on the show as well, and that I find to be very interesting, is I think most leaders have the idea that, yes, I should be a servant leader or I should be a humble leader. But I think you can see when that idea of humble leadership is forced, when it's, oh, I can't do anything right. Oh, look at me, I'm a leader, thank God. You know what I mean? When it's kind of that inauthentic humility that I think everyone can see through. Have you ever seen that in a leader and had to coach them in that regard?
Yeah, I just think I'll play off the word authenticity because that's a huge piece of it. And in fact, in a lot of the work that I do developing leaders is we talk about the drivers of trust. And what you're really talking about, when people start to see that this doesn't feel authentic, they start to lose trust in, wait, how you're showing up doesn't feel real to me, doesn't feel genuine to me. And so authenticity is, if you study this, and Harvard did a big study about this, and they came up with these kind of 3 drivers of trust. One of them being authenticity, that when people start to it doesn't feel real, their trust in you starts to go down. And when they see that, hey, this person's being transparent. It doesn't mean that, I believe everything they say, but I feel like they're being real and genuine. Even if I disagree with them, my trust actually goes up. And so those three drivers of trust are logic, authenticity, and empathy. And so people, they want to know, and can I understand logically, like, why are we doing something and what's the reasoning behind it? And when I can see that, and when I feel that there's some logic I can grasp, my trust goes up. When it doesn't, it goes down. If I feel like it's not being authentic and it's not being real, or there's some piece of information they're hiding, they're not being very transparent, trust goes down. And when they feel like you're being real and authentic, it goes up. And lastly, empathy is, are you showing that you actually care about the other person? Are you interested in their idea? How do they feel about it? What do they think? That it's leadership not by my way or the highway, but it's recognizing and sharing that kind of emotional intelligence and understanding that there's another human being. And so, do I truly care about what you care about? And when I do, trust goes up. And so it's all of us, none of us are perfect, and it's all of us can slip in and out of those. Trust is something we're always either building or deteriorating with the people around us.
Logic and empathy is an interesting dynamic because, especially for a lot of our listeners, Lean Six Sigma professionals, continuous improvement practitioners, very data driven, very numbers driven. So for leaders working in very numbers heavy, metrics driven environments, how do you recommend balancing hard data with the emotional and cultural side of change? Again, that logic and empathy, that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, it's hugely important. I mean, actually, the company case study that I just shared with you a minute ago is a bunch of engineers. And one of the first, when I again, in the first, weeks and months that I was with them, I can't tell you how many times different people throughout their company came up to me and said, we're a bunch of engineers, right? And they were very much leaning into this, data-driven, we're engineers, these are the ways we think. And yet, they as a company were recognizing that they had to be able to do both, that was going to be that was going to make them better as an organization and as a culture and ultimately as a firm if they could, yes, be data-driven and have hard data to support what they're trying to do. And yet, as emotional intelligence research would tell us, 58% of everything we do comes down to emotional intelligence. So outside of the data, can I understand what the other person might be seeing, feeling, and thinking? And what might I be seeing, feeling, and thinking? And based on that, using that awareness, what is it we choose to do? And we like to think that the world's black and white with just data, but the reality is it's more those emotional nuances even than the data. And so marrying the two of them together is where you start to then, I think, have the real special stuff evolve.
I think that's right. And I think that's a common theme when I've talked to leaders, practitioners, academics. But that is a hard thing to merge the two for a lot of people.
No doubt.
I mean, if it was that easy, everyone would be able to do it, right?
That's right. Yeah. And there again, if you study and understand personality dynamics and traits and the different wiring that we all have, like, we're all wired differently. And that's part of the beauty of this world, by the way. And it's a beauty of humans and teams and all that, but we are all wired differently. And so somebody who is very much an engineer-brained, wired, data-driven person, which that is awesome and important, and we need them. But yet there's somebody who's the exact opposite of that. And we need that as well. But yet how we coexist and make decisions and care for people and care for the performance and make decisions that not only just based on data, but also based on the outcome it's going to have on people, when those get married together, the outcome is typically better.
Jason, for leaders who are listening right now, who are trying to build momentum on their teams, what's one practical habit or ritual they could start this week to begin setting a more proactive cultural temperature within their organization?
Yeah, I just again spoke this morning for an organization. We talked about this framework that I have called the Solutions Huddle. But it's a really quick, and again, I'll give you the quick description now, but if anybody's interested, we can talk more about it. But it's once you have clarity around that temperature that you're trying to set. So what are those values? What are those actions and behaviors of how we're committed and aiming to show up as a team? Once you have that and you can articulate that future desired culture that you're trying to create, get in the habit of then having these solutions huddles. And I have some teams that they do it on a weekly basis, and it literally could be a 20-minute huddle. I have others that do it, once a month or once a quarter. Some use the framework not as 20 minutes, but use it as a full day retreat kind of thing to step back and look at what they're doing. But to be able to say, all right, well, where is it that we're setting the temperature of these values? And let's get really clear specifically in our action and behavior and the decisions we made and the things we're doing. Where is it that we're living these values we say we want? And where is it then that we're missing the mark? and that what we find is the teams that get in the habit of looking through that lens of the future culture and the values that they want to drive their work and have this ongoing and proactive dialogue around where are we consistently doing this and where are our opportunities to improve this and better set the temperature. They're the ones that make those small shifts, and they're the ones that end up getting out in front of issues before they become really big issues. They end up having less and less dramatic kind of blow-ups because they're already in the habit of talking about things when they're small before they grow and are avoided and get really big. I did a whole podcast called this kind of idea of addressing baby sharks, which if you Google my name and addressing baby sharks, you'll see that. But that's talking about this. How do you deal with something when it's small rather than letting it grow into something really big?
I will put a link to that podcast in the show notes, as well as a lot of other information for how people could reach out to you and find you and learn more about you, Jason. What's on the horizon? What's next? What can we be looking for from you? Anything exciting in the works that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, there's always exciting stuff. I think the podcast, the Thermostat Podcast, has been a really fun, creative project that continues to grow. It's a space where every Tuesday, and my own playground and content and ideas and great conversations and dialogue continue to come out. That's kept the kind of creative juices flowing. That's been fun. I'm sure. There's another book, I'm sure, at some point, but I'm not currently writing right now. And really where I'm just trying to really serve the partnerships that I have right now. And we have a lot of great stuff that's happening of developing people and culture in those kind of organizations like I described today. And I'm just trying to be the best partner for them and just to be authentically me and trust that that's valuable and important to what they're trying to accomplish.
Well, Jason, I am certainly very glad that you decided to share your authentic self with us here today on the podcast. This has been a tremendous conversation. I must say for me, from knowing you all the way back in high school and even before that, I think, to follow your career, to see what you have done has been very, very exciting. From Upper Arlington High School to the basketball courts at Denison, to boardrooms and huge keynote addresses throughout the country. It's been exciting to watch you continue to influence people in such a positive way. I appreciate that a tremendous amount, and I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much, Jason.
Oh, buddy. Pleasure to be here. Great to see you again, and thanks for everything that you're doing, and it's fun to watch what you're doing as well. So thanks for having me and inviting me to just contribute to what it is that you're trying to do. So this is awesome.
No, this has been awesome. And I love the positivity. I love talking about leadership and culture. And so much of what drives change, again, there's the data side, there's the number side, but you cannot ignore the culture side.
No doubt. No doubt.
Excellent. Jason, thank you so much. Additionally, I want to thank you, our audience, for spending some quality time with MoreSteam. You can email the show at qualitytime@moresteam.com. And if you're enjoying the show, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. Also, please visit our website, MoreSteam.com, to learn about the tools, training, and software you need to transform your organization into a problem-solving powerhouse. Join the ranks of Fortune 500 companies that trust MoreSteam for their enterprise process improvement. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Quality Time with MoreSteam. Thanks again.